So to introduce the square root property, let's look at an example to get a feel of what's happening. So let's look at a fairly simple example where we have x squared equals 9. This tells us that there's some x that has, or whose root, or has a square root being a 9. And in this particular case, we find out that there can be a 3. However, this isn't the only one. We also know that there's an x that also has the negative square root of a 9. And we can see this backwards. Negative 3 squared makes a 9. 3 squared makes a 9. So this is a little bit of an example of this idea called the square root property. So that we have, if we have some value that we usually determine here as u, and it's squared, well, its values, well, let me say if I have some u squared equals a d, some x squared equals a 9 in that particular case, then I have solutions of u that are going to equal plus or minus the square root of d. As I had here, one solution was plus square root of 9, another solution was square root or negative square root of 9. Some plus or minus square root of d is a terminology that we use when we talk about this type of an idea right here. And that can either equal, if you want to, square root of d or the negative square root of d. Both of those notations mean the same thing. Again, we use plus or minus as a shorthand script to say equivalently that there's two solutions here. Plus square root of d, minus square root of d. So now that we have an idea a little bit about what the square root property is, or maybe we don't, well, let's look at it in action because that's what really helps me. So we want to solve this for x, and we're going to continue with the same process as we've done before. We want to isolate the variable of x. So in this particular case, we'll divide both sides by a 3. Left with x squared equals a 6. And then by the square root property, I know that there's two solutions. X is going to equal either the square root of 6 or it's going to equal the negative square root of 6. And the way that we like to say those in a little bit more of a shorthand is x equals plus or minus the square root of 6. And we can check both of those answers. What is root 6 squared? If we plugged it back in, that's 6. 3 times 6 equals 18. Root 6 checks. Well, what about negative root 6? Substitute that back in. Negative root 6 squared is 6. 3 times 6, 18. 18 equals 18. So we can see that this also checks in this particular case as well.